This is a Labour Live's interview with Councillor Ian Ward, who's the Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council. Thank you for this interview.
Pleasure.
I'd like to ask you how you got into the Labour Party, and are you from Birmingham, or what's your background for people who listen to this interview in later times?
Well, I am born and bred in Birmingham. I grew up in the east of Birmingham. Father was a toolmaker, so skilled working class. My mother was a seamstress, and I grew up in a place called Tile Cross. Went to the local school there, Shystone School, passed the 11 plus, and went to the nearest grammar school, which was Central Grammar School. So I grew up in a very working class family, and at the time back then, Tile Cross, which is part of Shard End Ward today, a very white working class area, but it had a lot of working class pride. So people, took pride in their appearance, took pride in their homes. There was a lot of determination to work hard and do the best you could, and of course that was passed on to me. My father always instilled in me that you had to do your best at anything you did, and you had to work as hard as you could at anything you did, and I've carried that through my life. I joined the Labour Party not because there was any tradition of Labour Party membership in my family. There wasn't. I'm afraid when I was in my 20s, I used to be one of these people who would sit around in pubs boring people to death about politics, and eventually my girlfriend at the time said to me, look, either join the Labour Party or just stop talking about it all the time in the pub. So I kind of thought about that. I thought, well, okay, maybe I ought to do something about it then. And from that, I did join the Labour Party. And of course, what I thought I'd be joining this great crusade to change the world. And what I found when I joined Shard End Labour Party was that what I was joining was a very demoralised collection of members who were just fed up of losing elections to Margaret Thatcher. And of course, I bounded in young, as I was then, and somewhat enthusiastic about I was going to change this, that and the other. And inevitably with these things, you find somebody who's keen and you give them lots of jobs, don't you? And so I found myself, quite soon after joining the Labour Party, the branch secretary of Shard End Branch Labour Party and the treasurer of Hodge Hill Constituency Labour Party. And that's really how I first got involved.
Well, this is in the 80s, I'm presuming, by the time. I mean, Thatcher's 1979.
This would have been early 90s, certainly before 92 and everything that happened around.
Okay, but so
maybe late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, okay. She was toppled in 1990.
Oh, it would have been late 80s then.
Fine. So, Birmingham was suffering pretty bad. I mean, you're talking about your father was a skilled tool maker. I mean, there was a story in Birmingham that working people who had skills like that could leave a job on a Friday, get another one on Monday, because there were so many jobs around. But huge, great manufacturing losses in the city in the Thatcher years. So it's pretty depressed at that time.
Yes, I think that's right. Certainly, people in Shard End, we went very quickly with the loss of jobs in the 80s from this area of very much high levels of employment and working class pride to a situation where there was high levels of unemployment, and then over the generations, because that working class pride was lost, we're now in a situation in Shard End where 2-3 generations of people in families have never worked, and there's been this spiral of decline that's very, very difficult to break out of. There's a detachment now from the value of the education system, which when I was growing up, my as I've said, my father, everything I did said to me, you've got to do your best, and that applied just as much at school as in later life in work. But yes, you're right. That tragedy really of writing off thousands and thousands of people by taking their livelihood away from them is terrible. Terrible for the individuals involved, but an indictment really on the Thatcher government. And as I say, I joined then at the Labour Party in Shard End that was very much demoralised by the defeats to Margaret Thatcher.
Were you winning locally or losing? Who was in power at that time?
We were winning locally, so there were 3 Labour councillors for the ward. The MP at the time was Terry Davis, but it was, of course, national defeats, and the changes being driven through by Margaret Thatcher that had that very demoralising impact.
So we know you've gone to Central Grammar School. What do you do post school? Off to further education or what?
I did A levels, and then I left school after A levels and got myself a job. Worked at the National Exhibition Centre for a number of years, and then eventually I think I got a little bored with that. I used to have to work quite long hours. And so eventually I decided to become a driving instructor, and that's what I went off and did. And it's quite surprising, actually, when I was making that transition, the people who were coaching me in that couldn't believe I would give up a full-time job to become what's quite a precarious self-employed occupation. But I wanted to do something different, and that's what I decided to do.
Did that give you more time for politics as well?
No, quite the reverse, less time, because it's very, very time consuming being self-employed. So no, I had less time, but I wanted to give it a go, and so that's what I did.
When were you encouraged to seek office as a councillor? We know for the record that you've been in the council since 1995. To date, as I understand it, and just for the record, 1995 you get elected for Chardenne, the area that you were born and brought up in.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, 2005, you become deputy leader of the Labour group. So tell me, any mentors, people who said to you, "Come on, Ian, we want young thrusting people like you to come and stand on the council"? That's how it comes, isn't it? Somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, "It's about time, Ian." So
I was given a lot of encouragement by people in Chardenne Branch Labour Party. I was also given a lot of encouragement by Marge Bridle, who was the councillor for Chardenne and still is. And I first stood to be selected for the election in 1992, and I stood against a sitting councillor at the time, Eddie Rochford. We had the largest meeting of Chardenne Branch Labour Party I think there's ever been. 150, 160 people were there for the selection meeting, and I think I lost by 11 votes. And Eddie was selected, obviously, then as the candidate. But if you recall, back in 1992, that was the year that the local elections were just a few weeks after the general election, and it was widely anticipated that Labour under Neil Kinnock would win the 92 election. Of course, when that didn't happen, there was much demoralisation, and of course the few weeks later in the local elections, what we suffered from was certainly in Chardenne the lowest turnout I can ever recall, and we lost the seat to the Conservatives, the only time that's ever happened. And I mean, in a way, I look back on that now and I think, well, I probably dodged a bullet by not getting selected. Because that was, awful to lose the seat in '92 to the Conservatives. And then what happened next was when we got through to the '95 election, Fred Chapman, who was one of the other councillors, he decided to retire, and so I was selected to fight the '95 election, which we won. In fact, the Labour vote nationally was on a real high, I think 95, 96, going into the 97 general election. So we won by quite a margin. I forget the actual majority, but it was by quite a margin. So I was elected in 95, quite unusually, because I was told at the time you had to name committees you were interested in, back in the committee system, which everybody fondly looks back on, back in the committee system. And so at the time you had to nominate 2 committees you were interested in sitting on. And to be honest, I didn't know very much about it at the time. So I put down the Leisure Services Committee, and when that became known, everybody said to me, "You'll never get on there because you have to serve on the council for donkey's years to get on the Leisure Services Committee, because you get invited to the theatre and get to go and do all these nice things." So I said, "Oh, well, I didn't realise that. Okay, if I don't go on, I don't go on." But for some reason, by some miracle, I was put onto the Leisure Services Committee, and that was probably fortunate for me, because throughout my time on the council, now some 20 years plus, I have had this real interest in culture, and particularly sport, and of course I've been able to have that interest right the way through my career on the council. In 2001 I became the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Culture, through to us 2004 when we lost office, and then of course in 2005 I became the Deputy Leader of the Labour Group, and have held that position through to today. And I've been the Deputy Leader of the Council for the last 3.5 years. So throughout all that time, I think it's a great privilege to be elected to represent anyone really. But in my case, I'm particularly proud because it's somewhat unusual to be elected to represent the area where you grew up, which is the position I'm in. And I do take great pride from that. I was earlier today out at one of the primary schools, and the head teacher was talking about the fact that I was a local lad, grew up in the area, and that she thought that made a big difference. And I have to say, I think it makes a big difference as well. It's not just for me somewhere I represent. It's the place where I grew up. It's where my mother still lives. I have relatives that still live in the area, so it matters to me to represent Shardane Ward. It also matters to me that I represent the city in which I grew up now. To be on the largest local authority in the country, the city in which you were born. This city does matter to me. I want the best for it, and that's always what I've tried to do. In everything I've done, every role I've had on the council, really, I've tried to make a positive contribution to make things better for the people who live here and to move the city forward.
In 1995, when you came onto the council, what was the first impression as you became a councillor? What did you feel like? What were the first impressions of those early days?
I think when I first got elected and was on Leisure Services Committee, that used to meet once a month on a Thursday afternoon. And the first few meetings I went along to, I would sit there and think, how do all these people know all this stuff? How can they possibly know all of these things? Because it is, it's a big city. It's a huge responsibility, and the Leisure Services Committee covered a vast raft of area. Everything from libraries to parks to leisure centres to the youth service at the time. It was also in there, so a huge raft of things. And we might on a Thursday afternoon take decisions that spent, I don't know, 30 or 40 million pounds, on a Thursday afternoon. So it always struck me as being a huge responsibility, but somewhat daunting when you're first elected. And of course, the one thing I would say about the committee system that's different from the current cabinet system is that the one thing it did allow you to do as a member of the committee was to learn the role. You could learn about what exactly it was the City Council was doing in these areas, and you could learn how the City Council worked and how it then impacted on people's lives, and that's what I did really. Between 95, well, it was 6 years, wasn't it, from 95 to 2001 when I became the what was then, with the move to the cabinet system, the Cabinet Member for Leisure. So I'd taken that time really to ensure I was well versed in everything that role had responsibility for. I do think it's important not to just want roles for the sake of it, but to actually take the trouble to learn what it's all about, so you can do a good job should you get a position. Well,
you did then regularly get voted in by your colleagues to sit on that committee, and you've mentioned the committee system. What's your view about committees against nominated cabinet places? It's obviously a vast difference. One is an appointment by the leader, mm-hmm. and one is an election by your fellow councillors.
Yes, although when I first was a cabinet member, the cabinet members were elected by the Labour group. They weren't appointed by the leader as they now are. So that's a change. I think most people currently in the Labour group have not been on the council when the committee system was in place, so there is something of a fond look back in time to what the committee system actually means. I mean, I myself think that what probably should happen moving forward is there should be a small committee set up within the Labour group to actually go out and have a look at what the options are and have a serious look at what a move back to the committee system would look like, because I'm not myself convinced that would be the best thing necessarily to do. Certainly my experience of the old committee system was that you didn't have the power that as a backbench councillor that some people may now think you do. So it met on a Thursday afternoon. We'd be sent the agenda, which would be quite thick for Leisure Services Committee. We sent the agenda a week before, so you could have a read through it, and then you'd turn up to the Labour group meeting prior to the committee meeting, and you could raise issues in the Labour group meeting. But of course, the report was written. So, I used to, well, what about this, what about that? Well, the report's written in, and these are the reasons why these things can't happen. And then, of course, you go into the committee meeting itself, in which you were whipped. So, you could speak, you could make points, but obviously you're expected to be towing the Labour line, and you're whipped to vote for the reports that are presented by a Labour chair. The other thing that was different back then, that I don't know, I'm not sure actually, if we move back to the committee system today, this would still apply, but it certainly has applied back then. The chairman of the committee was not the executive decision maker. The chief officer was the executive decision maker, not the politician. And that's what changed with the move into the cabinet system, with the cabinet members becoming the executive decision makers. And I think one of the interesting things to explore is, if we change things around, does it still work in that way? Were we to go back to a committee system? I think it's worth looking at. I'm not convinced myself.
It's interesting because lots of people, I think, fondly imagine, to use the word that you said, fondly imagine that in the committee there would be this discourse, there would be everybody just saying what they felt, because they were there to discuss things and involve themselves in debate. And of course all of these things would nowadays, with the technology we got, likely to be live streamed, etc. Mm-hmm. It's a recipe for disaster if you're trying to run a party, isn't it? Yes,
I think where the confusion comes in, of course, is the committees we now operate, scrutiny committees, where that does happen because it's cross-party scrutiny of the decision makers. So there's no whip on in scrutiny committees, but certainly in the committee system, you went into that meeting, you were whipped, you were expected to vote for the reports that were tabled by a Labour chair of the committee, and you were expected to be backing the Labour line in those committee meetings. And as you've just rightly pointed out, if you're not doing that, it would be impossible to maintain any party discipline.
Did you hold any other positions after 2001? You sat on the committee for leisure services, if we call it that general term.
That's right.
So you then got voted by your peers to be the chair of that committee. Is that right? Or
No. The way this works,
the cabinet system.
Well, the way it works, Steve, was that...
Thanks for clearing it up.
I was elected in 95. The very last year that we operated a committee system in Birmingham, I was the vice chair of the Leisure Services Committee. So I was elected vice chair for the very last year. And then what happened is we moved to a shadow cabinet arrangement. So before the legislation came into force, we were a bit ahead of the curve in Birmingham. We'd moved to this shadow cabinet system, and Brenda Clark was the cabinet member for leisure, and I was elected into that cabinet post in 2001 when the cabinet system was live, and I was the cabinet member then for leisure from 1 through to 2004. Of course, as you'll know, we lost control of the council in 2004, so I spent 1 year, 2004 through to 2005, as the shadow cabinet member for economic development, and then in 2005 I was elected deputy leader of the Labour group.
In 1995, when you first came onto the council, Teresa Stewart was the Labour leader.
Yeah.
I think the first and only Labour leader of Birmingham City Council. Do you think her approach and the approach of Albert Bohr was inevitably going to cause friction and cause a desire to try and become the leader? I think there's a sort of a tension in politicians. Isn't there in a way somebody like Teresa Stewart, I think it's acknowledged, I've spoken to her, she contested the election in 1999, which she lost.
Sure, yeah.
I'm told that Albert Bohr came in late into the nominations to become the leader, and there were other contenders at that time. Where did you stand in terms of any of that, or if at all, because you were fairly new still into the council?
Yeah.
Were there quite interesting factions going on in the Labour Party? Is that always the nature of politics anyway?
Yes, I think it's very true to say there were factions going on back then, and inevitably you have groups that form, don't you, support one individual over another. I didn't recall that Albert was late into that election, but then again, we're going back a bit in time now. What I do recall is that my ward colleague, Marge Bridle, was in that election.
She was indeed, yes.
Yeah. So
I think there were 4 people up potentially running. Immediately, I can't remember all of the names, but I think Andy Howell might have thrown his hat into the...
Right. I think Doug McCarrick was in there as well.
Well, there you are. He might have made the 4th.
Yeah.
Because, of course, Sir Albert at that time, I think, was secretary of the party.
Group secretary.
The group secretary.
Yeah, possibly, yeah, possibly. Yeah. It's a while ago.
It is 16 years ago, yes. I appreciate that. I won't hold you to the dates and who was standing or whatever. But at that time, where did you place yourself on, if you like, within the broad church of the Labour Party? Are you the left, the middle, the right, or are all of those terms fairly redundant for you?
Well, I think back then, actually, I was not with any faction. I was very much, if I thought wherever anybody else was coming from, if I thought they were right, I agreed with them. If I thought they were talking sense, I'd agree with them. And if I didn't think they were right or talking sense, then I wouldn't agree with them. So I wasn't involved in any of those factions that existed. Factions is the right word. Groups that existed back then. And I took my own view on what I was going to do in that particular election.
Were you surprised that Teresa Stewart lost in 1999?
No, I don't think I was surprised by that, no.
And I then ask you, were you surprised that Albert Bohr emerged as the leader? He'd obviously been a leading light of the Labour Party since, he'd been nearly 20 years by that time a councillor.
Yes, that's right. I wouldn't say I was surprised. This is 1999, isn't it? So, I was quite busy, as I recall, with the job I was doing. So I don't think I was surprised. I don't think I'd anticipated any particular outcome coming about, really, because as I say, I would very much taken my own line when I was on, first elected in '95. Right the way through, certainly by '99, I was kind of busy learning about what was involved in leisure services, really, and so I wouldn't say I was surprised by the outcome, and I certainly wasn't disappointed by the outcome. It was a leadership election; people need to take a view. That's what they did, and that was the outcome.
I understand that the actual election was somewhat different to the one that's going to take place on the 23rd. In the sense that the candidates all presented or stood for election in the afternoon or whenever the meeting took place, and whoever actually got the lowest votes then dropped out, so people knew where those votes actually had gone. So we didn't have a single transferable vote system that we have now. Do you recall that? Or actually, it's interesting because it strikes me, looking at it from the outside, that this election is quite interesting because people have got to kind of make their minds up on who their second preference is or their third preference before they know who might have dropped out, which could make a difference. Mm-hmm. Have you any view about that?
Well, I don't recall, if I'm honest, the way that previous election took place in 1999.
I only have this from Teresa Stewart telling me. Okay. But I have that not in in any of the paperwork or anything. It's just that I understand that was the position. But let's move on. Well, did somebody come and tap you on the shoulder in 2005 and say, Ian, it's about time you moved up the food chain, and
Well, that would be
did some more things.
2001, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So 2001, you do move up
Yes,
into
yes.
the food chain.
So I was encouraged. I was encouraged to do that. I was encouraged to do that by Andy Howell, in actual fact.
Right. And what about afterwards to become deputy leader? Did you think, hold it? Yeah, I think I can do that. I think I've been here knocking around for 10 years. I think I know what I can do.
Yeah, throughout the period 2001 to 2004, in the role I had then, Cabinet Member for Leisure, I had worked quite closely with Albert through that period. And then when we went into opposition, of course, there were a lot fewer of us, otherwise we wouldn't have been in opposition. So there was fewer people actually engaged and trying to do things. And I was on what Albert formed a shadow cabinet, and I asked for and was given the economic development brief on that shadow cabinet. And during that year, Hugh McCallion was the deputy leader, and Hugh was intending. He didn't have the time. He didn't really want to do it on a long-term basis. And so I, at some point through that year, I went to see Albert and said, "Look, I'd be quite interested in doing this role. I think I can. I think I'll work with you and make a contribution." And then there was an election. In fact, there was an election at the end of the AGM of that year, not only for the deputy leader's post, which had then become vacant, but there was also a challenge to Albert as the leader of the group.
Yes, one of several he had over.
Yeah,
the
the interesting thing was that, or one of the interesting things was that it was Mike Ollie challenging Albert that year, and of course it was John Clancy running for deputy back then.
Indeed, yes. These names keep coming up. So you then become the deputy leader. You're still in opposition. We have an opposition that is comprised of the Tories and the Liberal Democrats, but Labour is still the largest group on the council. Am I right in thinking, numerically?
Was there a point where the Tories had more seats than we did?
It was pretty close.
Yeah, it would have been pretty close. We were down to 36 at our lowest ebb, and we were there for 2 years because it was there wasn't an election. But I can't actually now recall what the numbers were of the Conservatives and the Liberals. But we were down to 36 at our lowest point.
I'm just wondering why there couldn't have been an alliance between what many people from the outside would think was, natural alliances.
Labour and Liberal.
Yeah, why not?
I think that's because the Labour Party had been in office for 20 years. You had John Hemming, who was the leader of the Liberal Democrat group, and I think that in the same way really as we saw nationally after the Labour government from 97 through to 2010, was it? In the same way as we saw then with no winning party, a Tory Lib Dem alliance, I think that's what happened. In fact, I was saying in the run-up to that election that if we ended, because we'd been a minority administration in that last year, and I was saying through that year, if we ended with no overall control, then the Liberals would do a deal with the Tories, simply because they wouldn't want to be seen to be keeping Labour in office after 20 years in power. And I think a lot of this also depends on the leader, of course, and John Hemming, the leader of the Lib Dems, I don't think was ever going to enter into an arrangement with us.
So there was a bit of personality going on.
Oh, inevitably, yeah.
Yeah. In the same way that people didn't want to do business with Gordon Brown or others. Yeah. How much do you think personality plays in politics? Big part? Small part?
Well, essentially it's about relationships, isn't it? So I think it plays a big part, yeah.
Right. And looking, if we are towards where we are now, which is the election coming up for the leadership, you've not stood previously. You were obviously the deputy leader. You were voted in by your colleagues and continuously. So they obviously thought you did a good job. And come what may, and I just posit this as a question to you, come what may, on the 24th of November, after the vote, you will still be the deputy leader of the Labour Party in Labour group in Birmingham.
That's right.
Does that pose a bit of a tension or a problem in terms of who might, if it's not you, who is elected the leader?
It doesn't provide a tension for me at all, no.
Right. You could work with anyone?
No, it's quite the opposite. It's not that I can't work with anyone. Hopefully I can work with anyone. I think that I've been deputy leader now of the Labour group for 10.5 years. I'm now, I believe I've got the experience, the skills that are required to perform the role of leader. In fact, I think I'm the only one with the experience that you need to do that role. I'm the only candidate, I should say, with the experience to do that role. I think if the Labour group take a view that they want to move on, then I will move on. I've got my own life to live, and I need to move on in life.
Does that mean you resign?
I think I'm in this race to become the leader of the council. I believe I've got the skills, the experience and the ability to do it. As I've been saying, I think I'm the only candidate with the skills, the experience and the ability to do that role. And so I'm putting myself forward on that basis, and I'm looking to be elected on that basis. I think if that doesn't work out, then I have to consider what I do next.
Publicly, Councillor Holbrook has said that she wants, if she becomes the leader, everyone who's in the cabinet to stay in the cabinet to see that things are kept stable in these difficult times. Is that something that you can see as a good idea, a bad idea? Would you be adopting that policy if you became the leader, in fact? I'll put that as a better question. Let us not have a hypothetical about whatever. You're in this to win. You expect to win.
Mm-hmm.
And all the candidates I've spoken to all tell me that. Nobody's going to say, I expect to come second, obviously. But let me say this. 24th of November,
mm-hmm.
before you get the acclamation on the 1st of December as the leader of the council, what are the first things you're going to be doing and looking at for Birmingham? Because it's tough times in Birmingham.
It is tough times, yeah. I think there are three priorities for the council and the city over the coming months. The first is that we've got to sort out the budget. Now, we've got to set a balanced budget position, not only for 16-17, but also for 17-18. That is a requirement of the improvement panel. Not only that, we've got to set out the shape of the council for 2020, and we've got to start talking to people about what the council will be doing in 2020 and what it won't be doing in 2020. And that's about a different relationship with other stakeholders in the city and indeed with the people that live in this city. And we've got to start setting that out as part of our budget consultation that we will be launching this December. That is the absolute priority. If we do not get the budget right and we do not get the budget sorted, then we'll be in difficulties with the law, but my view is there will be government intervention if we don't sort that out. So that's absolutely the number one priority. The second thing we've got to do is deal with the other outstanding recommendations of the Kerslake Review, which the Independent Improvement Panel are monitoring. I've been meeting with the Chair and Vice Chair of the panel over recent weeks to talk about how we are moving those things forward. But again, you will have seen, no doubt, the exchange of letters from John Crabtree, the Chair of the panel, and the response from Greg Clark. And I think that you read that exchange of correspondence and you can see that we are on notice. The timetable, I think, is very, very tight. So we'll have a new leader on the 1st of December. The improvement panel will no doubt take a view of that individual, what they think, whether that individual is going to deliver the change that they require on the scale that they require. On the 7th of December, 6 days later, the City Council has to write its report to the panel on progress against the recommendations. And on the 14th of December, the leader and deputy leader of the council will be interviewed at a public meeting by the panel themselves. The panel will then consider things over Christmas and they will write their report to the Secretary of State in January. The Secretary of State has added to that pressure in his reply to John Crabtree's letter, where he says at the very end of his response that do not hesitate to write to me at any point should you believe that things are not moving forward in a satisfactory way. So we are here really on notice that we've got to get this right, and there's very little time left to get it right. So we've got to make sure we've got the confidence of the panel and we are moving things forward in the way that they would like to see. The third thing we've got to do over the coming months is play an active and determined role to pull together a combined authority. Because if we don't do that, we are simply going to fall further and further behind other regions in this country, and the city region as a whole will start to lose its competitiveness in the world market, and we can't allow that to happen. So we've got to pull together the combined authority. It is the only offer coming out of government for devolution of funding and powers. So we've got to find a way of making that work. And I think we've got to be ambitious in the ask we make of government for doing the combined authority deal with them. So at the moment, it doesn't seem to me that what we're being offered is anywhere near as ambitious as we need to be. And we seem to be making an argument that because we've got a bigger population than Sheffield, that we should have more finances devolved to us than Sheffield. I don't think that's an argument that cuts any ice whatsoever. It's not an argument the government are going to listen to. The argument we need to be making is that we have to have the infrastructure investment that we need, the investment in skills and the investment we require around housing to truly unlock the full potential of HS2. Because that is the way we can create the jobs that we need in the future, and it's also by getting the infrastructure investment we need, it is the way we can improve the competitiveness of the city region and move companies into a position where they're more competitive on the world stage. That in itself will create growth and create jobs. The other thing I think we should be asking of government, and I've begun this conversation with the Chamber of Commerce, is we should be saying, or making the case, what is the infrastructure investment we need to get businesses in this region into a position where they can pay the Birmingham living wage? Now, businesses are up for this discussion and this negotiation. So if we could do some research and some work to flesh out, this is what we need to increase competitiveness to the point where we could get businesses, or the overwhelming majority of them, to a point where they could pay the Birmingham living wage, then we could be introducing that on a regional basis, and I think that would be a big step forward.
Well, you've set out a number of things, but if I could reduce it to... Well,
actually, you asked me, didn't you, about the Cabinet?
I did, yes.
Because I think that alongside those three priorities, you've then got to ask yourself, well, what do we need to change? Because, from last January, the panel have been continually saying they don't believe that the Cabinet fully understands the challenges here. And I think, actually, if you look, we've got the Q2 performance report tabled at Cabinet next week on the 17th of November.
I've seen it on the internet, yes.
Yeah, so if you look very closely at that report, I think it's we're not hitting a number of those performance indicators that we should be hitting. So I think there has got to be some change. So I wouldn't be in the position of saying there's going to be no change on the Cabinet. I think there needs to be some change. I also think there needs to be a change in the relationship between the Cabinet and the Labour group, because there's a disconnect there that's been allowed to widen over the last 3 years, and we need to get the Cabinet and the Labour group back connected together again, so the Labour group has some influence over policies that are being developed by the Cabinet. That, I think, is very important. We need to empower the group officers so that they are carrying out the roles to which they are elected and reporting properly into the Labour group, and the Labour group needs to hold the group officers to account for the roles that they have. And that's a responsibility the wider group need to step up to the plate for. I think beyond that, we also need to change the way the Birmingham Party is operating. This is a city of over 1 million people. I think those 1 million people have a right to expect that the Labour Party puts candidates in front of them that are the very best that we can possibly find and able to carry out the roles that are required on the council to move this city forward, to form the partnerships we're going to need in the future, particularly with the business community, particularly with the NHS, particularly with the third sector and the people of this city, in order that we can continue to deliver the things that the council won't have the budget to deliver in the future. And I think, in the world of, it's come back to what I've been saying, I've been involved in all this time, in the world of culture and in the world of sport, you would expect any major city, anywhere in the world, to be hosting things like the Rugby World Cup, to have a ballet company, a theatre, an orchestra. You'd expect to see all those things in any confident and vibrant city. If we are to retain these things in the future, then we've got to have partnerships with the business community that are going to help us to deliver them in the future. If we're going to do that, we've got to be electing people who are capable of having the right conversation with business leaders in this city.
One of the things that comes out of all of what you say is that I've got the knowledge, I am the deputy leader, I've held high office at the very top, I know how it operates, I know how to engage with these people, I have the relationships. But also, aren't you in a way tainted by being part of the old guard that is seen to be failing, and the criticisms that Kerslake made about the city, which was about thinking that Birmingham Way was the best and that we were very insular. So whilst on the one hand you clearly are passionate about the city, clearly have articulated your, for want of a better word, vision for the city, on the other hand, how do you escape from not being part of that old guard and setting out this new way of doing things under Ian Ward?
Well, I think you are right that one of the criticisms was that Birmingham Thought thinks it knows best and doesn't look outwards. I'm very fortunate, actually, that throughout the period that we're in opposition and continuing through the time that we've been in office, I've done a large amount of work for what was the Improvement and Development Agency. It's now called Local Government Improvement and Development, whereby I've been a peer reviewer of services. So the LGA, as it now is, sends me into other local authorities to look at service delivery along with officers from other authorities, and we go in, we have a look at what they're doing, we write a report to help them improve and to move forward. I did that throughout the 8 years we were in opposition. As I've said, I'll continue to do it today, and I've been to many other local authorities up and down this country to look at all sorts of services that have been delivered and produce these reports. So I've learnt a lot over that period about how it works elsewhere, and learnt a lot of useful things to bring back to Birmingham to help change things in Birmingham, and I've done that throughout that particular period. Interestingly, or you may say ironically, given where Birmingham is, I've currently been asked by the LGA to do a piece of work in Rotherham, where of course there is government intervention and commissioners are in place in Rotherham. So I'm now working with members there about how they move things forward in Rotherham and get to a point where they can restore democratic control of the council there. And obviously that's very interesting, because I can see that there are some similarities in recommendations that the commissioners in Rotherham are making and things that are in the Kerslake report. So it's an interesting experience to see Rotherham, and of course interesting that the LGA have confidence in me to go there and help put that situation right. The other thing I'd say is that when the July letter was written by the Improvement Panel to the Secretary of State, it had a phrase in it. I think I may not recall the exact words here, but it was something along the lines of the senior political leadership do not fully understand the changes required. Now, I read that, Steve, and I thought the ordinary man on the street is only going to interpret senior political leadership as one thing, and that's going to be myself and Albert. So I phoned up John Crabtree and I said to him, I think, John, you put me in a difficult position with this letter, and I feel that if there is a problem with the senior political leadership, then I will have to resign. His response to that was to say to me, no, you should absolutely not do that, because that phrase, although you're interpreting it that way, is not about you. And in actual fact, if you resign, you'll make matters worse. And he was good enough to admit that the phrase may be somewhat clumsily worded, But he was quite clear to me that I should absolutely not resign, and that I was part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Did you go off and discuss that with Sir Albert and that letter? Because that must have been a difficult conversation.
I've spoken to Albert about that letter. There was a response sent to it, coincided with a cabinet away day, and obviously Albert and I have spoken throughout the time we've worked together, and we've worked together very closely, for 15 years, and we've spoken about many things over that period, and certainly throughout the last 12 months with the Kerslake review and the improvement panel, we've discussed these issues throughout that period. I'm not going to say exactly what the detail of those conversations were, because they are private conversations between myself and Albert, which I'd rather keep private.
Could I characterise them as being frank conversations?
Albert and I have always had a relationship where we're able to speak openly with one another.
On Sir Albert leaving the council, what's your view as to his contribution to the city? And do you think he has a future in Birmingham politics?
I'll take the first one first. I think he's made a huge contribution to politics here in Birmingham. He's made a huge contribution to the city. The developments around Brindley Place, he was a key mover in bringing all of that about. So his contribution is absolutely immense. And I have to say, on a personal level, having worked very closely with him for 15 years, I have learned a lot from him. I really have, about how you go about doing these things in working with the business community in particular, how you actually move things forward in that way. So, yeah, he's. I think it's fair to say he's been a giant in politics here in Birmingham for a long time. I do think he has a future. He's currently a member of the European Committee of the Regions. He's elected to that regionally. That will continue to be the case. And, as I've been saying, I've worked closely with him for a long time. I'm sure he will want to make a contribution to the city moving forward.
And lastly, what would you say is the major contribution you've made to the city personally over the last few years? What would you say? I can stand back and say, this has got my fingerprints all over it. I initiated this, I pushed it forward, I convinced my colleagues, I spoke to the officers, I drove that through. Would there be one thing or that you would like to set on record and take the credit for?
I don't think there's one thing, no. I think that both when I was the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Culture and the contribution I made through the 8 years we were opposition, because let's not forget, there's still a role to be played when you are the opposition. You don't just go home and sit there waiting for the phone to ring that there's another election. Throughout the year, you have to be playing out a role there, challenging the administration and ensuring that an alternative point of view is put forward. I think I would stand on my track record throughout my involvement over the last 15 years as either when I was the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Culture, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and the 3.5 years I've now served as Deputy Leader of the Council. I don't think there's one thing you put your finger on. There are many things where I've played a key part in ensuring things would happen. We've had to deliver balanced budgets in very strained circumstances with huge numbers coming out of the budget. I think 560 million has been taken out of the budget 2011 through to the end of this financial year. These are not easy numbers to deal with, and you have to make sure that the savings are made in year and the budget balances at the end of the year. And I would stand on my record in delivering that over the last 3 years. We've balanced the budget every single year. I played a key role in challenging one of the interesting, funny things actually. When we were the opposition, there was a cabinet report tabled about the then proposed Library of Birmingham, and I made some positive comment about it. And Mike Whitby, the then leader, said to me, "Ian, I like you, and you know what I'm going to do when we open this library? I'm going to send you an invite." And I said back to him, "Mike, by the time we open this library, I might be inviting you." And that is how it actually turned out, and I ended up sending the invitation to Mike Whitby for the opening of the Library of Birmingham, which I think was very, very successfully opened by Malala Yousafzai, and the decision to bring her to Birmingham to open the library, I think, was an inspired one, because that gave us worldwide publicity for the Library of Birmingham. I don't think we would have otherwise got. Now, I don't take credit for selecting Malala, because it wasn't my decision, but certainly it was within my portfolio back then, because if you recall, when we started off, we had a smaller cabinet than we have today. But I wouldn't single any one thing out, really. I think I've played a prominent role across the piece. The deputy leader's position, you have an oversight of everything that's going on that the council's doing. My remit, which is finance, HR, land and property, performance, and when we started off, did include many of the cultural services. It's given me an oversight over that 3-year period to much of what the council has been doing, and I've played a part in all of it.
In the actual elections, it's all been fairly good-humoured. Some of it appears to have become a little personal. What do you think about that? Do you get feedback from other councillors who approach you and say, look, Ian, this is what I think you should be doing, or what do you think you should... I mean, you must be having lots of conversations with people. Is that positive to you? Do you feel that therefore there's a receptive audience for the way you're doing things and what you should be putting forward? Do you feel that you're going with the flow, so to speak?
I think I'm having lots of positive conversations with lots of people within the Labour group. I'm sure others are also. What I would say about it is I don't think people should be being put under pressure to come out publicly and say who they are voting for. I think this is a Labour group matter. This is a secret ballot that will take place on the 23rd of November, and people should respect that process.
Councillor Ian Ward, thank you for speaking to Labour Lives.
Pleasure.